Hey guys, Matt Allen here. Welcome back to Tactical Bassin. Today we are talking cold water crankbaits. If you are tired of throwing worms, slow dragging a jig, and you want to do something different this winter, there is an alternative. You can throw crankbaits if you know how to do it during the cold water season. Cold water cranking. How fun is that? Traditionally in the wintertime, we're slow fishing. We're down there on the bottom, dragging baits, moving slow. If you want to catch a giant, you're creeping that swim bait or slow dragging that jig. Well, there is an alternative. On Monday, Tim and I released our Tactical DD Crank. If you guys missed that video, we'll give you a link to that. But we promised in that video to circle back around and teach you how to throw a crankbait in cold water. And we're not just teaching you how to do it with our bait. There are a lot of great options out there on the market. We want you guys to understand this entire concept. Obviously, there's a reason we built a bait. I'm going to explain that to you. But there are a bunch of options that will catch fish for you this winter if you know how to use them. You can't do this with just any old crankbait. You don't want to open up your box of summertime baits, pull out a chartreuse black or a parrot or a bright orange bait, go out to the lake with a wide wobbling bait and think you're going to catch a bunch of fish. That's not how it works. It is way more specific than that. This has to do with triggering a feeding response in a bass. And we're actually going to show you the technique here in a minute. But first I'm going to talk you through the bait and the actual concept behind it. So what you are looking for in a bait, you are looking for extremely natural colors, and then you are looking for a very tight action. So you don't want a wide wobbling, hard moving crankbait. You want that tight vibration. You want a deep diving crankbait that almost feels like it's a lipless. There are a handful of baits that do that well. Now the sad thing, well, before I even get to that, this concept is not new. The idea of cranking in the cold water has been done for a long time. The wiggle wart is really, I think, where that got started. The wiggle wart is a bait that will catch them year round. Now there are some other great alternatives in the category now with that wiggle wart. You know, the Spro rock crawler is one. The Sixth Sense is another. These are baits that do a dynamite job, especially in craw patterns in the winter. But again, these are baits that run a very unique vibration to draw that triggering reaction strike. So the sad part is that over the years, a lot of really good baits have come and gone, a lot. The Jackal is one of those baits. This was a bait that came on and off the market way too quickly. It was a bait that worked dynamite in cold water, but people didn't understand what it was for. So if you bought a bait that shined in cold water and tried to go out in the middle of summer and throw it, it's not going to work the way you would expect. It's not going to compete against a true warm water crankbait. So they tend to come on and off the market. They don't do well because anglers didn't understand what they were for. Actually, the first time I ever saw it work here on my home lake was with a couple of clients. Came out, it was cold water, and they caught some fish. And that was eye-opening here on Clear Lake. It's not a new thing nationally, but it was a new thing here. And that really got the wheels turning. So that's just an example of one bait that came and went. There are so many of them, but there are still some dynamite options. Mega Bass as an example, the Deep X 300, the Deep 6, probably baits that you are familiar with. Both of these baits are big fish producers, but the main place that you see them being fished is either in the cooler months for largemouth, guys in the late fall, or guys sticking smallmouth up on the Great Lakes, fishing back east. Those are the primary places you see those baits getting fished. Well, are you putting the puzzle pieces together? They shine in colder water. The Deep 6, that's kind of a crossover bait. It has some warm water applications. It's a wide enough wobble, it's a large enough profile that there are some summertime applications there. That smaller guy, that Deep X 300, an amazing cold water bait, but often overlooked but not as dynamite of a bait in that warmer water. Not what it was for. Super tight action. Then again, that Sixth Sense, that rock crawler, more baits. Now, tending towards the craw patterns here, smaller profile, they deflect extremely well, so they're great baits to be down grinding and digging in the rocks, in the cover, bouncing off hard cover. Those are really good options. Down in the video description, of course, we'll link you every one of these baits I'm talking about, because I'm just glancing over some of the really good options for you, but we'll give you specific colors and when we're using each one of those baits, a little bit of an explanation. Then the last one is our bait. The reason we designed a bait, because obviously there were some baits on the market that were good for cold water cranking. Well, some of our favorites came and went off of the market. They became hard to get. Some of the other options are really good at niche things, certain depth levels, certain water temperature ranges. So we wanted a bait that came in the colors that we really wanted and will work at a variety of depths at a very specific frequency. We really went into that on Monday's video, so I won't really delve into it again. But that is what Tim and I were doing when we met with Simon and designed this bait. So again, a bait that will get down there, it'll stay down there, but you can get super reactive with it and it will draw that insane reaction strike. That is what you're after. Cold water bass will absolutely come unglued and go 100% to try and catch up to a crankbait, no matter how cold the water is, if it is presented properly. I think that's enough about the baits. Again, I'm gonna link them so we don't have to go into all of the details. Let me show you how we actually fish these things. To show you how we're fishing these baits, I'm gonna use Tim and I's bait. I've got it set up on two very different combos. The first is a 7.5 footer with straight fluorocarbon. The other is a 7 footer with braid to a mono leader. Both are great ways to fish any of these cold water cranks, but you need to understand what they're for. First off, these baits can be fished at a variety of depths. They're made to get down deep, but you can do things that will slow that down if you need to fish shallower. If your fish are higher in the water column or up in shallower water along the bank. If you want to keep a bait up in the column, the two things that you can do easily, one is don't put your rod tip down low. So we got a lot of questions right out the gate. Hey, your packaging says this bait can run anywhere from 0 to 18 feet of water. I fish a pond that's 12 feet deep. Can I fish the bait? Well, of course you can. The two things that you can do is either fish with a rod tip up a little bit higher, which will drastically change how deep that bait will go. It will keep it way up high in the water column, which will let you run over the top of grass or cover, or there's a fish, or up off the bottom. Ooh, it's a good one. Sorry about this. We'll get him out of the way so we can keep talking here in a second. Hey, buddy. So keeping it up in the water column, up off of the bottom, so keeping it up off of the bottom, up in the water column, will let you stay in front of those fish or let you fish effectively over the top of cover. In this case, that fish was actually suspended up in the water column and came after that bait. The second thing that you can do to keep that bait up high in the column is just go to a heavier line. So if you're normally throwing your crankbait on 10 or 12 pound fluorocarbon and you want to get up higher, not dive as deep, switch to a 14 or a 16. Anything that's larger diameter will keep that bait higher in the water column naturally. The benefit of that is if it's staying high in the column because the line is larger, you can still go really fast. Right now, to show you, I'm going pretty slow, but that's not what we want in a cold water crank. We actually want to be burning when the water gets really cold. It's still fall here in California. It's still cooling down, so we still have options. But when that water gets really cold, you want to be moving that bait. So that larger line will let you go fast and stay up in the column. Now on the flip side of that, most anglers want to get a bait down. They want to get it as deep as possible. So straight fluorocarbon is the easiest way to get the depth. The line is really thin. Because it's smooth, you can make extra long casts. You can cast way farther than you can with braid most of the time. And just making a long cast, putting that rod tip low to the water, or even sticking it just underwater will let you get maximum distance, which equals maximum depth. So typically during the cold water period, we are going to do this on either 10 or 12 pound fluorocarbon. That's going to let you get as deep as possible with that bait. That is the advantage of fluorocarbon. After that, the advantage really does switch over to braid. With braid, we have all sorts of options, and that's where we really get to focus on triggering these bass. Now the real magic is in braid. When we switch to braid, we can get extremely reactive with these baits. The reason why is that braided line has very low stretch. So when you're burning that bait and you stop, that bait stops. When you go, the bait goes. There's not a lot of give. If you're going to try and do the same thing with fluorocarbon, you might have noticed in our videos in the past where we're burning along, and when we go to stop, we actually lean out to that bait. You actually extend the rod. That's us laying as much slack out as we can to try and imitate the same thing with fluorocarbon, but you never quite get it perfect like you do with braid. So with braid, you can really get aggressive. You know, we're burning that bait to get it down. Stop, burn, stop. Getting really, really aggressive, trying to get a bass to just react. It is not about a desire to feed, not in cold water. When you're in the early part of fall, there's a desire to feed. Those fish are out there, they're being aggressive, they're chasing bait fish, but as those temps drop down, those bass get lethargic. We've already done a video on where bass go in that fall to winter transition. When those fish are making those moves to their deep water wintertime haunts, they get far less aggressive. It's more about surviving winter than it is about eating aggressively. But what shines with this crankbait, the reason why you want to do this, is that the crank is one of the only baits, a crank and an A-rig are the only two we've ever found that will pull a true feed response, a true reaction out of a bass regardless of water temperature. So as the bait is coming in, you don't want them to see it. That's why the natural colors. We taught this briefly the other day. They're feeling it and they're hearing it come, but they're not getting a great look at it. But as it passes them, they come after it. That's where that key vibration is. When they come after it and it's running away from them, and that bait comes to an abrupt stop, and they're still coming, that's when they see it. And when it looks right, they smash that thing, no hesitation. They will be some of the hardest bites that you get all year. So fishing these things, again, 7-to-1 reel. We are going fast. This is not your regular crankbait. This is speed fishing. Oh, I just got bit. See if we can catch him on the next cast. Right on that pause, there was a tick. Let's get down there again. Burn, 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 pause. And because we're using braid, it's a true stop when we do that. We're also throwing the braid on that shorter rod. This is one of Tim and I's favorite combos. This is an 845 CBR. It's the same rod that we throw that LV 500 on, the lipless, when we're slow bottom fishing. It's a 7-foot rod. So the rod itself is very parabolic. It has a lot of give, but it's not loaded up as deep as a 7.5 footer when you're actually cranking. So when I stop, it's easier for the rod to unload. Again, it's a combination. You've got the braid working for you, the rod working for you, everything to make that bait as aggressive as possible to get the hardest reaction strike. Now, if your goal is just get deeper, spend more time, if maybe your fish are sitting deeper, fluorocarbon is the way to go. But if they're up where you can reach them easily, braid to leader is the way to go. We'll link you the exact gear that we're using down in the video description, of course, to make it really simple. Cold water cranking is something that you can do. You can be effective with this technique. It just takes the right baits. Now, for those of you that stopped mid-video and went and checked the stocks on those baits already, you've already seen that our crankbait is completely sold out. Some of the other baits are extremely low stock. The good news is that you can still back order them. Our crank will be back in stock really soon. And if you get your order in there, they are shipped out in order. So if you back order them, you do get them first and you will have them really, really soon. We are working hard to get those back right away. Now, as for the actual fishing, here is the best news of all. This technique, cold water cranking, drawing a reaction strike, it actually draws a more aggressive reaction the bigger the bass get. So not only are you getting away from that slow, methodical winter fishing, you're not worming or Ned rigging or dragging a jig. All fun things to do, but not if it's the only way to catch them. So you're getting away from that, but more importantly, you're getting a true shot at the biggest bass of your life during a time of year when you were just going through the motions trying to catch anything. This technique catches giant bass. Again, the key is the right bait. Tim and I spent years and years and years trying to figure out what made these fish tick. Why did one bait work one day but not the next? Why did one bait work on one lake but not the next? As we went cross country, it got more complicated. Little nuances came out. One thing worked here but not there. That is when we finally decided we needed to build a bait that would work for all sorts of different things. But all of these baits that we mentioned and linked are baits that are great during the cold water period. So if one of them looks like something you've had success with before, try it on your fishery. But a bass is a bass no matter where you are in this country. If your water is anywhere from just above freezing all the way up into 60+ degrees, this technique will work for you. You can draw a feed response from giant fish. Guys, get out there and do it. You're going to have a great time and you're going to get a break from the kinds of fishing that you do every other day. Have a blast out there. Guys, if you enjoyed this video, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and we'll talk to you soon.